And here we are. Welcome to a special edition of the Teachers Room at iTDi. We're the International Teacher Development Institute. We have the Teachers Room on Tuesday nights normally and Saturday mornings, but we have a special one this week on Saturday morning or Saturday lunchtime here in Kyoto, Japan. But we're with Dorothy Zemach. Hi, Dorothy.
Hi, here on a Friday evening.
There you go. That's
So
that's one of the main difficulties in life these days as a first world problem is figuring out time zones of who you're talking to. Yeah. So what we're doing today is basically having a chat teacher to teacher, and we have a course coming up that Dorothy's done with iTDi the last couple of years. This will be the third edition of it, called Self-Publishing in ELT. So we're going to focus on that as well. But we always kind of start these with a little bit of your history. So I'm really curious because I simply don't know. We've always talked about publishing or whatever we're working on at the time. But do you want to bring us through from how you got into the industry and sort of what you've done through the years? Go ahead.
I got in the wrong way and I came out the right way, I think. So I studied in university. I studied what I wanted to, without any thought to employment. So I came out with a degree in French literature, and was thinking, well, now what do I do? And in those days, one opened the classified ads of the newspaper and one looked, and you'd go through the restaurant stuff. And I'd done that through college, but I didn't want to do it forever. And I applied for a job at the library, but my typing was too slow. And then there was a two-line actually ad that said, "Teach English in Japan, call," and there was a number. So I called the number. I went for an interview. It was explained to me, and at least I'd done, second language learning, and they. Yep. At the time, 1985, that was good enough. He hired me. About, 2-3 months later, off I went. Between the time I was hired and the time my plane landed, the person who hired me sold the school to his head teacher, who had therefore inherited someone coming on a plane. And he met me at Narita Airport, and his first words were, "I just hope you're normal." So I don't know if I was or I wasn't, but I rested for one day, I observed classes for one day, and I started teaching the next day.
What year was this?
1986, I guess, 85, 86.
Yeah.
So apologies to that class. The first week I was still learning, but the thing my boss did that was good was not only did he give me a lot of personal training, but there was one other American teacher, and he enrolled us both in Juggle. And he drove us every Sunday to the meeting. It was once a month, but every time there was a meeting, he drove us to the meeting, so you couldn't possibly not go. And they were fantastic. My best teacher trainings came out of those Juggle chapter teacher training meetings. You'd get somebody who for 3 hours would give you a really intensive workshop on how to do something better. You'd go off, you'd have a month to practice it. When that was under your belt, you'd come back for another Juggle meeting, and there would be somebody else with 3 hours of something else that was really good that you didn't know. And
let's tell everybody what JOLT is, the Japan.
Yes, sorry.
It's okay, the Japan Association of Language Teaching. And that's pretty much the biggest organization for teachers here in Japan.
Yeah.
There's a Japanese version as well, the JASA.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's the same in a number of countries, that there's a national conference. Yeah. Get a mixture of theoretical and practical, but the monthly chapter meetings are purely practical, and those were gold. So I taught for a year. I loved it. I extended for another year, and then at that point I thought, oh, this is actually a thing that I might like to do. And then I did one more year in Japan to save enough money so that I could go to graduate school.
Oh, okay.
So after I went to graduate school and got a degree in it, then I went some other places. I came back to Japan, but at the point when my son was approaching elementary school age, my husband and I thought we might like to have him in an English-speaking country.
Yep.
So we came to the U.S. because that's my country. And, the students were great, but the salaries were low.
Yep.
And I started writing books to supplement my income. And from that, I developed a love of not only writing, but also of editing. And I did some freelance editing. And I finally left full-time teaching for a position at Cambridge University Press as a senior development editor. So I did that for a few years.
Was from the video I watched. That was in New York State, New York City?
Well, Cambridge was in New York. I was in Oregon, and I was telecommuting.
Okay.
Because, along that time came the internet, and you didn't have to be sitting exactly where your publisher or your employer was sitting.
Right.
And from that, I mean, I loved editing, but I still love materials writing. So when I went freelance, I could, and still do, a mix of both. I edit some, I write some, I author some, I publish some, I do some teacher training, and it's kind of a mix of,
So
we'll work for food.
I'm curious how you, were your friends at the time doing materials writing? Like, what was the impetus to get started in that?
Well, that also goes, so many things go back to Japan.
Yeah.
Post MA, I was working at Sumitomo Electric Industries as a trainer. And it was early internet days, and the students or trainees that I had were all full-time Japanese salarymen, and maybe 3 women. So they could work really hard in my classes, but they could not do homework because they didn't have any hours at home.
Right.
I had 16 hours a week of class time, but I had to be there 40 hours a week or 45 hours a week. So once you've taught your class a few times, that actually frees up a number of hours where there's no papers to grade because they can't do homework, not much lesson planning because you've already planned the lessons. What do you do?
Yeah.
And it was one of those times when I was feeling a little bored that a sales rep from OUP called and said, "Can I come by and show you the latest things?"
Yep.
And normally I would have said no. I think of salespeople like insurance salespeople or something, but I was just, I just wanted to talk to somebody in English. And so I said, "Sure, come on by." And that was Robert Habak, and he showed up with books, and we talked. And I said, "Could you take away these things I don't want?" And he did, and he talked about materials. And then we were talking about a series that I was using called Business Venture that I love, really wonderful book for business English. And he said, "Oh, yes, we're doing a second edition of that." And I said, "Oh, are you? Would anyone pay me to tell you all the mistakes that I've found? Little things where the audio script doesn't match the student book or something doesn't quite match." And I was kind of joking, but he said, "Yes, actually we would."
Wow.
Oh, okay. So I typed him up, sent him in, and got $250. And then they said, "Well, actually the commissioning editor for the series is coming through Japan. Would you like to meet her and talk to her about your experiences teaching the book?" And I said, "Yes, I would very much." And so we had a meeting, and I told her, "This page works, this page doesn't work, and why?" And she said, "Well, we're looking for people to write the teacher's guide because the authors are going to do the second edition. The authors want to do a workbook. They don't have time to also do the teacher's book. Would you like to submit some sample units?" And I don't think I was the only person who tried out, but I was chosen, and I wrote the teacher's book. And from there, I realized, oh, I do like materials writing.
Yeah, that's right. Did you notice you had a knack for it right away?
Yeah, and I also, I had a fantastic editor who could tell that I was interested. So she would, at the same time she edited my material, she would explain to me the entire process. This is how art is chosen. This is how long it takes to do the recordings and why. And she kind of fed me all this information because she could tell I was interested. Yep. And it was at the end of the project, I mean, there were 2 levels of the book, so went on for a few years, that she said, "Oh, you have what it takes to become an editor." And that sort of planted that seed in my mind.
Yeah.
But from there also, I mean, I inherited, I was 1 day a week in the head office and then 4 days a week out in the factory. And the teacher before me who had my position also had obviously the same classroom, the same desk and whatnot. And he'd mostly cleaned out his stuff, but he'd left some of his worksheets in the drawers. And you can tell by somebody's worksheet if they're a good teacher or not.
Absolutely.
And I could tell he was a great teacher. Oh. And the internet was kind of just starting. I just got an email. And for no particular reason, I asked for his email, and I sent him an email. He'd moved on to Hong Kong where he's working for Longman. And I said, "Hey, really like your worksheets. And we struck up a friendship from that. And when he went back to the UK, because his wife is English, and was doing some commissioning work for Macmillan, he tapped me to write my first student book for Macmillan. So it was, you know, a series of coincidences, but thank you, Japan, for putting me in the right place at the right time.
Sounds like a very awkward pickup line to say, hey, I really like your worksheets.
Your worksheets. But I didn't mean anything more to it than I really like your worksheets. And I think he is a good, that was Louis Lansford, who's still very active in teaching and editing and teacher training and materials writing.
Shout out to him. That's great.
Shout out to Louis. Those were great worksheets.
Yeah. So you also, I know, just from your travels and talking about visas and passports and airline tickets, and you take us through all of those adventures through Facebook. Yeah. But I know that you're doing teacher training. Is it through the U.S. State Department?
Oh, it's through all kinds of different.
Yeah. So, I mean, just as a venue for, I know one other teacher who's just started doing some of those, but just to introduce that to our audience, how did that go?
Well, I probably the first teacher training that I did was via publishers.
Okay.
Right? Because
yeah, of course.
They not only, I mean, they sponsor commercial sessions of here's the book and here's Unit 6 and how it works. But if they're sponsoring you to a conference, there's often one purely academic session, teacher, where you just do the area that you're good at. I mean, my passion is academic writing, so I train in that area. And I might also have a session for Macmillan, or if I've done a writing book with Macmillan, they're happy to have me talk about writing. And from that, you begin to get a bit more known or something. And then I did register with the U.S. State Department. I put it off for a long time because their application form is long.
Yeah.
Long and repetitive. And I was kind of like, do I really want to fill out a long application for something? I don't know if I'll ever get chosen. And then a friend pinged me on Facebook one day and said, if you fill out that application now, I can guarantee you'll go to Libya.
Oh, wow.
Like, ooh. So I filled it out and I went to Libya, and I've been doing stuff with the State Department ever since. I also do work as a consultant for Transform ELT, which is made up of former Nile people in the UK, and that's mainly through the British Council. So I've been doing two years in Algeria, and it looks like we're coming up on the third year there of training English inspectors. And then sometimes teachers' organizations will reach out and say, we really want someone who speaks on teacher burnout, or we really want someone who speaks on writing, or somebody who does, you know, intensive reading skills. And if they're looking for a certain specialty or expertise, then they'll reach out.
So how much do you enjoy doing that stuff?
I love it. I love it. The travel itself gets a little tedious sometimes. I think just as I get older, but I would say it's you know, like the best days of being in a classroom, because what you have is teachers show up and the motivation is high. They've either given up time or money or both to be there, so they really want to learn whatever it is you've come to show them. So whatever activity you give them or information you give them, they're there to try it out. They're on your side. You work through stuff, and hopefully you send them away better able to do something.
Yeah.
I just had an email that actually came in off my website from someone who had attended a training on, actually it was on test item writing in Slovakia, but I must have said something about reading, because we were looking at you know, test items from reading passages. And he wrote and said that he'd never been able to enjoy reading in English, although he enjoyed reading in his two mother tongues. But something I said about not translating every word on the page, he realized, I've been doing that. So he went back and he'd been through The Sun Also Rises. He read The Great Gatsby. He was moving on to Kill a Mockingbird. And he said, now I love reading in English the way I do reading in my mother tongues. And it's like, so I mean, that's the kind of experience you can have. Yeah. Which wasn't even him with his teaching skills. That was just him actually in a sense, as a student of English. And great stuff.
I've been doing for the past 6 years with one of the Japanese publishers, been doing the teacher training around the country. And I'm curious of your opinion about with the Japanese high school teachers, so many of them just lack confidence, the lack teaching confidence, and sort of second guess themselves so much. And I've had some really beautiful letters follow up, or I've done something follow up with them, and it's a lot about just empowering them and to learn to observe and
and I think also just to be aware of a larger context. I remember when I went, I spent 2 different months at a large language institute in Yemen. And when I was first there, the teacher sort of showing me around looked just sort of humiliated and said, "I'm so sorry about our terrible facilities." I'm looking around these beautiful rooms with stained glass windows and lovely desks with the flat tops. And I said, "Well, your facilities actually look pretty good." Yeah. I said, "Oh, well, but I'm sure in America." I said, "Well, let me bring you some photographs of typical American classrooms." And I showed her some good ones and some sort of rough and tumble ones, but she just had no idea. Yeah. There was just nothing to compare it to. So, I mean, a Japanese teacher who has never spent time observing other people teach might genuinely not know how good she is.
Yeah, yeah.
So, if there were a way for them to observe each other, but also to observe, teachers in other countries, or
it's so much of its awareness, isn't it? It's just that basic awareness of people, and too often people go to their worst imagination.
I think that's somewhat human nature, but also somewhat maybe even specifically teacher nature. Yeah. If you get 30 evaluations and 29 are glowing and 1 isn't, you obsess over that 1 because you really wish you could help everybody. So you've delivered a lesson and 1 kid in the back seems bored and you think, "Oh, I'm a terrible teacher." Yeah. But the more it comes with experience too, but the more you observe other people and talk to other people, I think you get a more balanced perspective.
Yeah. So I just watched in the chat for everybody who's here as an audience, at the very top of the chat box, I have a link. Maybe we'll drop it in again near the end, but a link to the TEFL in the UK, the TEFL conference, where you, Dorothy, gave a plenary this past, when was it, March, April?
Not last year, but the year before.
The year before, on your birthday.
April, that's right. Yeah, it was on my birthday. So.
Yes,
It must have been April then.
Yeah, and did you have so we've talked about just a little bit on the teacher training, and you get a lot out of that, but in actually getting up and presenting at conferences and things, how much fun is that for you?
I love it.
Yeah, you look like you were loving it. You look like you were really having fun, which is what I want to see in a plenary speaker.
Yeah, well, I think it's. I mean, what is your reason for giving a talk? I mean, I think it should be because you have something you want people to know, and that in particular was a message that I wanted people to have. And actually, the year before, when I was talking with the board of trustees, and we're vetting topics and talking about it, someone said, "Publishing, not that many people in our audience are materials writers." And I said, "Well, the materials writers already know what I'm going to say. The people I want to reach are the classroom teachers who have no idea about these factors that affect the materials that they're given." Right. So I don't need to meet a small subset of people who already know this stuff. I need to meet a huge group of people who have no idea that these are issues that are affecting their daily classroom lives. So
yeah. I picked up just a couple of the lines, the tell publishers what you want. Yes. Can you extrapolate or unpack that just a little bit? Well,
at their core, publishers, I think, want 2 things. I think they genuinely do want to help teachers and students. That's why they're in educational publishing, which is marginally profitable, but it's not hugely profitable. If you go into this field, a lot of them are former teachers themselves, and they do genuinely care about their mission. But the other part of their mission is to make enough money to continue doing their mission. Yeah. So you don't want to make a book that won't help people, but you don't want to make a book that won't sell, right? Yeah. So when publishers talk about what the market wants, which is something that they frequently bring back to authors and writers, what they mean is they would like to make the books that teachers would like to buy and use. So what's that based on? Is it based on the instincts of a few salespeople who've listened to one or two very vocal teachers, or is it based on something broader? So if a lot of, one person goes to a publisher and says, I really want a listening speaking book that's 90% listening and 10% speaking, that's probably not going to happen. But if a whole bunch of teachers went to a publisher and said, hey, in these listening and speaking books, they're heavy on speaking, bit light on listening, we need more listenings, we need longer listenings. If enough people were giving the same message, the publishers would take that message and they'd do something with it. Mm. But if you don't speak up, they have no way of knowing what it is they're not providing.
Right.
By obviously publishers are going to play it a bit safe. They look around at what is selling and they make a slightly different version of that. They don't take huge chances because they can't afford to lose huge amounts of money, unlike the self-publisher. I mean, not that we can lose huge amounts of money, but I mean, we can take chances that big publishers can't. But if they had a feeling that there was a groundswell of people saying, we want this or we don't want this, absolutely they would listen. Mm. And so if you approach a salesperson at a conference, the salespeople are the conduit between the customers and the publishers. They will absolutely take that news back to the mothership, and it will have an influence.
And so it seems like the two easiest ways for teachers to do that, to communicate that, is by either attending conferences and going to the exhibition areas for the publishers, or actually answering the phone and accepting those invitations where the publishers spend a good part of their year, a couple of times a year, traveling through high schools and universities and on the sales route.
I mean, most people have a sales rep that covers their area, or perhaps a distributor for publishers who covers their area. And if you called up and said, I'm looking for a low-level business English book for pre-work students, do you have anything? And if they don't have anything, and that people keep asking for that kind of materials, that's going to go back to the publishers as well. Everybody's asking for this. We don't have that. Why don't we make it?
Right, right.
I think some of the best books that have arisen have come from teachers who really wanted to buy a book they couldn't find.
Yes.
And so they wrote it.
Mm. So there were a whole bunch of other themes that you went over in that TEFL plenary that I'm not going to go into so much, just because you do it so well live and with a smile on your face on your birthday. So just tell people to look at the link up above and sit back with a coffee and enjoy. I was amazed how quickly it was, like 45 minutes, and it just whizzed right through. You peppered in just the right amount of funny slides to make your points.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I lost a good video that I wasn't allowed to show because of copyright reasons. It was legal for me to show it.
Right.
But it wasn't legal for them to stream it onto YouTube.
I see.
People want to go to YouTube and look up Harlan Ellison, Pay the Writer. That's what I couldn't show you.
Say it one more time.
Harlan Ellison, he's a science fiction writer, and if you just Googled not Googled, but searched in YouTube for his name and Pay the Writer.
Okay. It's worth watching.
It is worth watching. It is worth watching.
Okay.
But I think at the same time that this is sort of a crisis time, or not a very good time to be working in traditional publishing. It's also sort of the best time to be looking at self-publishing and all those projects that publishers can't afford to take or don't dare to take, or the audience is too small. That field is wide open for self-publishing.
Perfect segue. That's exactly where we're going.
Right. I mean, I don't know when you started teaching.
1989.
Okay, I would say, but in the kind of late 70s, early 80s, you might remember there were some course books. I think Interchange was around, maybe Headway, but there were a lot of what I want to call like one-off books. There'd be a high-level discussion book, or there'd be a low-level reading book.
Yeah.
And we've lost those. I mean, a few have survived into second editions or third editions, but for the most part, publishers are going safe with multi-level series and with course books, because that's where the sales are. And if you have a reading book, it's going to be a reading series. If you have a writing book, it's going to be a writing series. And those aren't bad,
Right.
but they're not everything.
Right. Right.
There could be a high level discussion book for which there is no, level 0, 1, 2, and 3. It just is what it is. But nobody's making those anymore.
Right.
But self-publishers can, because you're not paying rent and space for an office in New York and London. What you're investing is your time.
Yeah.
And which is, not a small investment, but if you also love what you do, and if your materials come out of your own teaching, some of that time is time you're spending anyway, and it's hopefully time that you enjoy investing in materials.
So give us the background, just a little bit, of how you went from doing freelance, working for CUP for a while, piecing together your ELT existence, and then deciding to start your own self-publishing business with Ways Goose. So give us a little background there, and then we'll go into the issues.
I've been dipping my toes into fiction writing and publishing.
Okay.
Under a pen name, you'll never find it. Not from this link, anyway.
It's not Harlan Ellison by any chance?
No, it isn't. I wish it were. And I used to teach at the University of Oregon. I still live with a 10-minute walk from the university, so I have friends who teach there.
Yep.
And there used to be 2 classes of positions. One was more kind of what would be tenure track in any other field, of people who are on committees and they do some research and some teaching and whatnot. And another group of people who only did classroom teaching. They didn't do any kind of university service. They didn't present or publish. They just taught. And at one point, the university decided that classification of teachers who just taught was going away. They all had to be tracked into the other, for some legal reasons.
Yeah.
So they said, no problem, everybody can just reapply for their jobs, but the same criteria apply. So people who'd been teaching there for maybe 10, 15 years suddenly have to reapply for their jobs. And as a good friend put it to me, she said, what are the chances in October that by March, I will have identified a research area, carried out the research, found something significant, written it up, submitted it to a journal, been accepted, had it published and out, so I can submit it with my application in March. There's no way.
No.
And I said, well, okay, but I could publish you in a weekend.
Oh.
And I said, you must have like stuff on your computer. You must have something written. So we're having lunch, and by the end of the lunch, the first thing she said was, but I don't know anything.
Oh.
All I do is teach.
Oh.
And I said, yeah, but teaching is a thing, right? You could write about teaching, because teacher training, that's a thing. And by the end of lunch, I said, but you're not going to, are you?
Oh.
Yeah, because if you're not a writer, you're not used to writing.
Right.
So I said, well, what if we went out to the coast for the weekend, brought some laptops from the universities, got a bottle of wine, some bags of salty snacks, and her eyes lit up and she said, oh, I love the coast. I said, great, let's figure out who else is in the same position. We identified one other person in the same position who I also liked. And we went out, we rented an apartment on the Oregon coast. We took takeout Chinese, got the bottle of wine, and we sat around and we brainstormed and we wrote books. And one of them wrote self-study tips for students. That became the 50 ways to practice reading, 50 ways to practice writing. And the other one wrote tips for teachers, 50 ways to teach reading, 50 ways to teach writing. We took the 50 ways because, 50 Shades of Grey was really popular and it just struck us as funny. And we didn't care if the books sold. They just had to exist so that they could be publications.
Right.
So we put a price of $1 on them, put a cover on them, slapped them up. We got 3 books out of one weekend, and they took off and they began selling. And other people began writing to me saying, oh, could I do the grammar book? Or, oh, let me do vocabulary. I'd really like to do pronunciation. And now we've got a series that's expanded. The teacher's book's gone into paperback, and let's have. But
were you set up? Or were you set up as a publishing Ways Goose, or were
well,
you?
I was set up as a corporation when I went freelance, but under the general umbrella of writing, editing, consulting.
Yeah.
So to add publishing to that, no big deal. So And those two people who wrote those books really are at their heart classroom teachers. They don't want to run a small business. They don't want to do the accounting. They don't, want to handle buying ISBNs. All they want to do is write their stuff, go back to the classroom, and have me send them a check every 6 months.
Right.
And from there, I began getting approached by other people. Oh, could you do this book? Does this look good to you? And now I pick and choose those projects that interest me.
Mm. How many projects do you juggle? How many projects do you juggle at once?
Oh, at once? I don't know, 7 or 8 probably. I mean, everything's in different stages. I just uploaded the audio for an audiobook to something last night. I'm editing 2 other things now, one in a final proofreading stage, one in a more developmental stage. But since I am an editor, and I mean, that I think is the most crucial piece that a publisher provides for you is the editing.
Yeah. So what's the, we started a little while ago on it's a perfect time for self-publishing. It's a really, I'd like to go in there a little deeper.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect time because the big publishers have sort of seeded that whole area of smaller projects to individuals. They're not stepping on your toes. Somebody asked me once, like, "Oh, what happens if Pearson finds out you're doing this?" All my publishers have been enormously supportive.
Yeah,
I can't self-publish a course book, but they're not interested in doing 50 tips for teaching grammar. So they're doing what they do best. I do what I do best, and I haven't had any publisher say anything uncomplimentary about that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But also there's sort of I'd say little to no financial barrier.
Right.
If you want to open a self-publishing account on Amazon or any of the other distributors, that's free. Mm. So the only cost to you is in time, and as I will argue in my course, paying someone for a good cover and for some editing and proofreading. Mm. You can skip those stages and do it yourself, but the results are not always great. So there are some areas where I would say it's going to take you a small investment to get your book going, but nothing like the barriers to opening most small businesses. Yeah.
That's with things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. If you have a good idea these days, you're not eliminated from trying. You just have to put a good idea out there, and it's quite.
And I think for most people, the cost of creating a book is so minimal. You wouldn't need a Kickstarter. No, I don't know that many Kickstarters in self-publishing. I mean, I know Marcos Benavides who did a very. He told me he was going to do a Kickstarter for his books, and I said, nobody's going to pay for that.
Right.
I did. It was a great idea. I helped fund him. But he was heavy art intensive, and he did need a lot of money at the beginning to pay for some fairly significant artwork. But if you didn't have that kind of cost, you wouldn't even need a Kickstarter. You'd need to.
And I just meant that I wasn't associating Kickstarter with self-publishing as much as just the idea that you don't have to have a giant, overhead backup angel investor these days. You just need a good idea, and there's so many ways to get accessible now.
You do still need a good idea that is relevant to more people than just you. Yeah. And I've published some books that I thought, this will take off. And they just didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know if they haven't found their audience, or the audience was just much smaller than I had imagined, or we didn't market it right. I mean, not everything, even if you pour your heart into it and make quality materials, is going to catch on fire.
Right.
But it's certainly not going to catch on fire if you don't make it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I think there's also a sort of market for materials that aren't necessarily sold to strangers. But if you were a teacher teaching the same course over and over again, and you've developed kind of like, a course pack of materials, you don't have to photocopy 1 million sheets for every student every term, half of which they lose before the course is over. You could bind them up into a nice ebook, give them a link, and they could print out those pages that they need, but they don't need to print out readings and whatnot. I mean, it's also kind of just an environmentally friendly way to deliver some kinds of materials to students rather than the endless photocopies.
One of our audience just wrote something. I just want to run
Oh,
it
okay.
by you. I don't know that it fits right here, but I don't want to forget it. So
Go
I'd
for
love
it.
more audio books in the education space, at least on Audible. I find it hard to find them.
Actually, but most of my 50 Ways for Teachers books are on audiobook. A narrator approached me before I even had an account and said, I'd like to narrate these books for a royalty share.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I don't think you know what these are. These are ESL teaching books. And he said, I don't care. And I was like, well, okay, if it's no investment for me, go for it. And they outsell the ebooks.
Oh,
There absolutely is an audience for audiobooks. And I just started graded readers by an author who is also a narrator. So I think that is an underserved space.
And I hear people who are traveling an hour each way or more every day, and they would feel a little less guilty about their travel time if they pop on an audiobook, I guess.
Can be doing something. I mean, obviously not every teaching book is going to work as an audio. I mean, you're not going to listen to a worksheet, but if it's methodology or theory or inspiring essays or something, you absolutely could have that on audiobook. I think the barrier to that is what it costs to make a recording.
Yeah.
So after I did those 50 Ways books, maybe, I don't know, 6 months later, Audible slashed their royalty rates, at which point fewer narrators said they would do it for a royalty split, and instead they want to be paid up front.
Right.
So if you're sure you're going to get back a $3,000 investment, you'd go for it.
Yeah.
If you're not so sure, you'd be more hesitant. People can also upload their own files as long as they meet certain requirements. And since I'm not myself a narrator, I don't know what those requirements are. But I do have an author who narrates her own stuff. She made an account with Audible. She uploads the file. I do the rest, and out we go.
I just know this teacher, his name is, I've been calling him Daleb, but obviously it's Dale B.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Dale. And but Dale's written, teachers are busy, so audio books are much easier.
Yeah. Or people who are commuting in their car, or they're on the train or something, and it's awkward to read. I mean, you can't read a book in the car if you're the one driving. But
right, exactly. So let's move over to your iTDi course that now you've done for us.
Okay.
Did Barb approach you? Did you run into each other? How did this get started? Do you remember?
No.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Probably came through Chuck Sandy, because he and I did a book together, my English for Scammers. That would be a good example of a book that I love, but it just doesn't sell.
Right.
It's like a really long joke, and I think it's a good joke, but it's not funny enough for people to actually pay for. But we had a blast writing it.
Oh, good.
And after that, Chuck had been through the process, and he was working with iTDi and said, hey, could you teach other people how to do this? And it's like, yeah, absolutely.
So now we're going in next month, in July, going into our 3rd edition of this course. Can you do just a quickie intro into what it's all about?
So, and actually one thing that's different this year from the previous 2 years is I think we've realized in 1 month, there's not enough time to think of an idea, begin writing, and also learn how to turn that into a book.
Yes.
So I'm looking this time for people who already have an idea and have written something. Yes. They don't have to have written the whole thing, but if they have 1 unit or, I don't know, 5 pages, something that is material, a chunk, then we can take that chunk and learn how to format it for an ebook, how to format it for a paperback, talk about covers and images and handling that kind of thing. What works in an ebook? What do you do if you want a chart in there or something? But it's a real hands-on course. We'll spend some time talking about how do you make sure that your materials are suitable for other people beside yourself. We'll do some pure, I don't want to say editing, but peer advising and reading, and you'll have a chance to test your materials on an audience of people who are not you, which I think is important. And then we'll get into the nitty gritty of how do you actually format this? Does this make an ebook? I tried to make this into an EPUB and this happened to my image. What do I do about that? And it's a chance to try it all out when you have someone there to advise you. And also I think for writers, which is maybe more important than it should be, it's nice to have deadlines. Right? If you have a full-time job and a family and friends and maybe a hobby as well, you want to write and you keep meaning to write, but you never get anything written. But if you know that come next Tuesday or Saturday or something, you've got to post what you've written so far and respond to someone else's piece, there's more chance that you're just gonna do it. So it kind of gives you that structured accountability.
Yeah.
Well,
so just for anybody who doesn't know, I'll just fill in a gap or two that we'll have 4 live sessions. So Dorothy has taken the process and basically split it into 4 weeks of like an hour presentation where you'll go through both some of the background theory, some of the design, some of the technical aspects of doing things. And then throughout the week, teachers or people involved in this course will have assignments and as you said, some kind of peer commenting with each other on like a yeah. And it's a pretty intense month, but I've noticed we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years now, these 1-month courses, but I've appreciated having your recordings more than almost any other course because there's so much information, enough of it's technical that it's like when you get a really good YouTube video that shows you how to do something, you go back and work through it, stop and start, stop and start.
It's just handy to have, I think, the sort of troubleshooting. I mean, you think we get a class of, 12 or 15 people. Everyone's on a slightly different computer. Someone's got Word 2011. Someone's got Office 365. Someone can't get to this website in their country. So it's really hard to find one set of instructions that will suit everybody. But when you're in a community and you say, I can't get this to work, then we've got a hive mind of people who can troubleshoot your way through it and think of alternatives and get you through it. So a lot of it is trying out the tech stuff, seeing which way of creating an EPUB file is going to work best for you. And it's not always the same answer for everybody.
Right.
And so we have those 4 sessions and work between the sessions. And then for the next, it kind of depends on who shows up and how far along their projects are. But we usually go another 2 or 3 months after that of time when I will still read anything that people submit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
and
it's not
very, very kind of you.
Well, because a month is not that much time. So if you've tried everything out and learned something, then you might want to take another few months. And for those people who pay for the, I don't know what you call the second tier of that.
Yeah.
There's sort of 2 tiers. I
yeah.
can't remember what their names are, but
a distinction level, I believe.
So those people actually have a full year.
Yeah.
Of when they can contact me and get their books out and troubleshoot and whatnot.
So somebody's asked about the dates. I'm just going to say it out loud. It starts on July 7th. It'll be 7, 14, 21, 28. And now let's just confirm here that Phil has mentioned that he's gotten messages from some people who are interested, but they're not ready in terms of having content finished. So can you just one more time?
They don't have to have content finished. They need to have
That's what I want to clarify.
Content started. So if I say, take your pages in your Microsoft Word document and do this to them, it kind of doesn't matter if you have 2 pages or 200 pages. But if you have 0 pages, you can't do that step. So,
exactly.
and it's not, and it's also, I mean, that first stage of having an idea can take some people a really long amount of time. In a month, you don't have 4 weeks to think of what you might like to do. And so in the past when, people would work for 2 weeks and then say, you know what, I think I'd really rather do this instead. And that's fine, but then you're 2 weeks behind. So if people come saying, I know I want to do a book of essays, or I have all these blog posts that I've been writing for 3 years. I don't want to keep up my blog anymore, but I do want to keep all those posts. I'd like to make my blog posts into a book.
Yeah.
Actually, I like to do a book myself during the course, because in that final session, I like to show people what it looks like to upload one live. And I used to blog for Betty Azar's grammar site, and she's taken her site down.
Oh.
So I said, hey, could I have my old blog posts? And she said, absolutely, help yourself. So I'm going to take those and make them into a book. So I'll be doing that alongside everybody else in the course.
Yeah. I remember, just if somebody feels like that they don't have the tech savvy ability. I remember one of the women last year who sent a couple of messages that she was really struggling and the learning curve was high, but that by the end of it, she was so satisfied with herself that she had gotten over it. And she did have to go back and watch the video again and stop and start. But it's challenging, but to create something and come out at the end of that intensive time and have something that's got your name on it, it's online, it's for sale, or it's uploaded, it's a truly empowering first step, I think.
I think so. I think so. And of course, once you've learned the process, you can apply that to materials for the, the rest of your future.
Yeah.
The first book you create doesn't have to be your only book.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had someone last time, I think actually didn't finish the course, maybe didn't start, I don't track everybody, who wanted to take all the guidelines for their TEFL SIG and make them into a little ebook so that when the leadership changed from one term to the next, they could hand all the documentation to the next person. That would be a wonderful use of self-publishing. If you lead a Juggle chapter or the testing committee in your university, and all these documents exist, and it sure would be nice to give them to somebody else, but not in papers or some form where they get lost, but in an ebook, then everything will stay together. So it doesn't have to be a book for sale. It can be a book just for an institutional use or an organizational use as well.
Yeah. I see Vance, one of our members, is asking that he's very busy this July, August, blah, blah, blah. Would he'd look forward to this course running again in the future? And I'm going to say that it's basically something you've said to us you enjoy doing. And as long as it fits into your schedule and there's a demand, people interested in taking it, that it may come up again, huh?
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to do it once a year. Which month it is sometimes depends on my travel schedule. I'm away in September this year. It wouldn't be September, but I'm here in July. That's easy. I've done, as you know, sessions from on the road, but it's easier when I'm home and a bit more settled.
Yeah. I just had a question. Where was I going? Yeah, I lost it. It was a good question too.
Ask it again, person.
Yes. A senior moment. Thank you, Kevin. Yes.
Does anybody else have questions as well that you could put in the chat or ask? And I've got one for you while you're.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dorothy, for anybody who's interested in getting into self-publishing, taking that for the first time, then where would you suggest at this time, looking back with hindsight, would be a good place for them to start?
To start
getting into self-publishing and finding out.
Taking my wonderful course, you mean?
Yes, for sure.
There's so many message boards. There are books to write. One that I would highly recommend is called Let's Get Digital by David Dahlgren, which is a wonderful kind of introduction to self-publishing. It's geared a bit more towards fiction writers, but I think a lot of what he says would apply to nonfiction writers as well.
Great.
I got my question back.
Oh, okay.
I was wondering, in the self-publishing world, you're learning things online and there are changes. Do you have any sense that it's evened out, or is it still changing constantly?
Oh man, it's the Wild West every day, and a lot of the huge sea changes do affect fiction writers more than others. There's a lot more kind of gaming of the Amazon world, a lot more scandals and whatnot. And those of us in educational publishing are just sort of, going along calmly at the side. We're not making the huge money that clickbait farms are, and we're not so much involved in the piracy and the plagiarism and the this and that. So I look on in awe at some of the shenanigans in fiction, but at the same time, I'm just gonna keep moving along. But as various scams affect the Amazon world, they change how they configure things. And but I think it gets easier and easier all the time. They're looking for ways to remove barriers for people to make it easier.
And, well, I remember some of the software, I won't mention here, but some of the software you introduced, which just seems, I have a friend who self-published a book from scratch and then found out that there were software apps available that you could just put in, and out comes a book to a degree. So,
but I mean, if you start and end with Microsoft Word, that is enough to publish a book. And that's enormous. I mean, that really is game changing. And I think at the same time that, it started with Apple, but then everyone else sort of followed suit. The royalties that they offer, which is 70% of cover price.
Yes.
That's so different from the traditional publishing 10% of net.
Yes. Yes.
So per copy, you make so much more money.
Yep.
I think it makes you also a more discerning customer of publishers in a way, so that if I'm going to publish through a publisher, I'm better now at asking, well, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to do for the manuscript? Am I going to get good editing? Am I going to get a good cover? What kind of marketing do you bring to the table? And if you can't bring that kind of added value that's worth 90% of the profits, then I'm not going to give you 90% of the profits. I'll take them myself. And even if I'm paying for a cover designer and I'm paying for an editor, I pay it once. And that's over. And all the profits go to me.
Well, I'm gonna give you a shout out here in response to Phil's question about where to start. I mean, that's what this course is about. It's just what an opportunity to work with a small community of other teachers. Everybody's on the same track for this month together, and we have somebody who's been doing it to kind of hold our hand and introduce things along the way. There's no better place to start. For
a lot of the resources that are out, kind of the chat rooms and the books and whatnot, are geared towards fiction writers. And it's not that the information doesn't apply to educational writers, it's that we have other concerns too. We're the ones saying, well, how do I get my chart in here? Or what do I do if I need students to write something and they can't write in an ebook? And we're all used to that kind of material. So I think it's nice to have a community of teachers, because we're a smaller subset of the publishing world, but it's nice to work with other people who know what our challenges are.
I want to wrap up just briefly. This has gone by real quick, but I just want to wrap up with the last time I saw you in person, you were standing with Marcos Benavides and David Barker at the Jolt conference. And for both of them, I mean, David Barker is one of our plenary speakers this year at the Jolt conference, and he has his own small publishing company. And Marcos Benavides just won the Elton for his new edition Widgets books. Can you mention a little shout out for either of those in terms of why were you hanging out with them?
Oh, well, I was David was the one who sponsored my plenary to Jolt. I edited for David for years. He's got his own publishing company. And we've had some terrific online fights over grammar. He's someone who cares as much about commas as I do. And but his whole publishing company grew out of his frustration at not being able to find the kinds of materials that he felt his students really needed.
Yes.
Nobody else was going to make those. Then he was going to make those, and he did, and they worked brilliantly.
I love that about him. I approached him to be a plenary, and I love his attention to detail, as I love yours, and that might be the common thread with Marcos as well.
And with Marcos, I heard him
Have you fought with Marcos? That's
No. He's not as passionate about commas. I tell him where they should go, and he goes, okay. I edited or went through one of the graded readers that he's. Now I saw him and his co-author Chris Valvona when Widgets first came out with when it was still a Pearson book or possibly even a Longman book. I can't remember how long ago it was, and they were doing just kind of a an introduction to our book, and I was in the audience, and that's a brilliant book. That is a brilliant book. And I had gone to that presentation because I knew that I had a business English book in the works that sounded similar, and I thought, oh no, did somebody just publish my book 6 months before me? And fortunately theirs was very different, so I could relax. But sitting there I thought, wow, that is a good book. So I went up to meet him and Chris because I thought these are people I really must meet. And Chris later co-authored a writing book with me and has worked on parts of Macmillan projects that I've worked on. And Marcos and I just stayed in touch. And so that book, I mean, Pearson did a decent job publishing it, but I'm not sure they ever really understood what they had.
They never did.
So it didn't get any, but it's also, it's one book. It's not a 5-level series. And as the whole attention goes to 5-level series, a 1-level book that was done by the Hong Kong office just sort of gets forgotten. So Marcos and Chris took that back, and that's not a small project. That's so many moving parts in that book, and they self-published that. And what a triumph! What a triumph! And I'm just so happy that they got it back and did something with it. And I'm glad it won an Elton because how deserved. I mean, that is really a fantastic book. Everyone should go buy Widgets. Even if you don't teach that level, just to read it and go, that's something that's possible with materials. Yeah.
But that's something you mentioned in your plenary as well, as if they don't have it, just go out and do it yourself. Or, I mean, that's a wonderful testament to ideas that you've been suggesting in some.
Yeah. So hopefully people out there have ideas that they'd like to see brought to fruition, and they'll join the class and we can make those be books.
Yeah. Okay, so everybody, we're going to wrap up with that, unless there's anything else you have been dying to say that I haven't asked you about. You're okay?
I'm okay. I didn't know if you were scanning the comments there, but just giving you a moment.
Yeah. I'm just, it seems like we've caught up with everybody. So with that, I'll be hosting you this month in January for the month-long course.
July.
We'll get to see you each week. And
July, Steve.
July, yes. Sorry.
Not January.
And so if anybody's interested, you should go to the iTDi.pro page, and you'll see the course listed there. And Phil, if you're quick enough to throw in a link to the course, that would be helpful. And we want to thank everybody for joining us. And again, we're here normally on Tuesday nights or Saturday mornings right now in something called the Teacher's Room. And it's been very, very nice of you to give us a bit of your time, Dorothy. It's been a pleasure. Great fun. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. And with that, we'll wrap up. I'll turn off the recording. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.